You want to know what's going on here in the local Southern Oregon real estate market, not New York, LA, or Texas, right? It's current and local information that's going to help you make the best decisions about buying, selling, or investing in real estate. And that's exactly what you're going to get in this video right here. I'm bringing in a special guest who has a totally different background than I do, has a different perspective than I do, and we're going to have a really good conversation about the housing market outlook in Southern Oregon and really talk about what does it look like for 2024, do some 2024 housing market predictions, and answer some questions like, should I wait to buy in 2023, and is the housing market going to crash in 2024? We're going to look at all of that and really break down some really good data for you and look at some numbers and different scenarios. So I think you're going to really enjoy it. You're going to get a ton of value out of it. And so let's go ahead and dive into that. Hey, I'm Brian Simmons. I'm a licensed real estate agent here in Southern Oregon, and I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions about the real estate market. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact me directly at 541-954-7758. Now let's cut right to the chase and dig into that data and talk about the housing market outlook for Southern Oregon. I'm going to introduce you to our special guest first so that he can hear the most recent market data as well, since that's what we're here to talk about. So allow me to introduce you to Ryan Friend with Nations Lending, the best mortgage lender in Southern Oregon. So say hello, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So what I want to do is just kind of dig in here real quick to the data and just explain what has happened here in the last week. And then we'll get into the real meat and potatoes because I know people are really just dying to hear about that housing market outlook for Southern Oregon. So let's take a look at the actual market data real quick. I'm just going to explain it. For the week ending yesterday, July 25th, 2023, we had 1,109 homes on the market as of this morning, and that's single-family residential homes between Jackson and Josephine counties. 95 new listings hit the market in the last 7 days, which is much lower than what we've seen in the prior weeks at 119. 111, and so we're quite a bit lower than that. 122 price changes, 25 came back on the market, 122 went pending, which is actually a pretty big number. The weeks prior to that, we were 101, 101, 102. So we're actually pretty good and pending over the last week. 78 closed and 24 expired, withdrawn, or canceled. So my takeaways from looking at that data really is inventory went down. That's a big one. We've kind of seen that happen. There's a seasonality to the inventory, which I'm sure you're aware of, Ryan. Like everything, in this business, it's very, very seasonal. There's a buying season, and it's funny, like that slide down in terms of inventory typically happens right about this time. Last year, it happened the last week of July, first week of August was the peak, and then it started going down from there. So we're at 1,109,
Right.
and so that could be just a down week, and maybe we pick back up for another couple before we really start that slide, or that could be we could have peaked and we could be heading down. So we'll see what happens there. But that was one big observation. And then just that great number for pending. So to see that maintain, at 122, that's pretty awesome. So I was happy to see that. And that just shows that there's, strong buyer demand. So,
Well, and what that signals for me is that, the people are becoming more and more aware of what the new reality is on where we are, especially with the mortgage rates and, how volatile things have been over the last 18 months. That's one of those things now where we're seeing more people moving forward and trying to capitalize on the rates that are available today, because as much as there's doom and gloom in the media, it's not as bad as people think.
oh, it's absolutely true. It's not. And the thing is, like, I've said in weeks past in these videos, like there's always going to be the life events that cause people to need to buy or sell. You have another kid on the way, and all of a sudden your two bed, two bathroom home is not big enough anymore, and you need something bigger, or that whatever else, divorce, a death in the family, like all those types of things create life events that cause a need to buy or sell. So there's always going to be that, regardless of where rates are at. So, but speaking of rates, like let's jump in and talk about what's happening in the market and really, get into the outlook for what we expect to see going forward. And I think before we do that, I want to just reiterate to everybody who's watching this that like we're going to talk about some speculative stuff here. We're gonna not try to pull out a crystal ball and predict what's going to happen. So we're not guaranteeing anything that like things are going up or down or whatever. We're just speculating and saying like, hey, here's some things that could happen, and if they do, here's some math that shows what that might look like. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear that we're not trying to encourage you that hey, things are going to go this way or that way. This is just if they went this way, here's what it could look like for you. So I want to get that out there very clearly.
Yes. Well, I mean, I can tell you this, Brian, that with what has happened in the last couple of years in the mortgage world, it's almost been impossible to predict what's going to happen. Um, you know, Historically speaking, prior to COVID, rates were relatively stagnant. I mean, we were hovering around. I was looking at my pipeline from before, anywhere from 4.5 to 3.5%. Is a pretty standard rate. And then COVID happened and rates bottomed out, and everybody thought this is where the new norm was going to be. And then inflation happened and all of the fun metrics that happened, and the economists had no idea that we were going to heat up as quick as we did. And so now you have these people speculating, especially with the Fed, on how we're going to curb inflation. How does that directly affect interest rates? I'll give you guys, and I'm sure you've probably talked about this a lot, but just kind of a brief understanding of why and how we're in the position that we are. The long and short of it is the economy heated up real quick. We had a lot of jobs, a lot of new people into the job market, which then caused inflation numbers in addition to everything else going on in the economy with the bottleneck in supply chains and all those things over the last couple of years, to get to a place where the Fed said the only way that we can curb this is to start putting the Fed rate up. What people don't realize is that when the Fed comes out at the beginning of the year and they say, we plan on raising rates X amount of times in the year, lenders like myself and the companies we work for, we all build that pricing, we build that expectation into what interest rates we're going to be quoting clients for that next year. And so we are anticipating rates are going to be high. And so the media puts you in a place where you're saying, oh my God, the Fed raised the rates again. And you just think rates are just skyrocketing up. The rates have gone up, obviously, since COVID. I mean, higher and quicker than anybody anticipated. I've been doing this now for 10 years, and that was the quickest swing up that I've seen. People I've talked to that have been in the market for 30 years have never seen something like this. And so now we're trying to settle into this new reality of where we are and why we're here. And so, rates being in the very low, like I said, 3s and 2%, now being in the 7% in some instances, depending on your credit score and the different types of factors, that really is discouraging people without talking to a professional. And so looking at what to project and what we anticipate, right? The Fed's meeting today, it's right now as we record this meeting, they're going to be meeting in about an hour. So we'll have some new data next week to share. But the speculation is that the Feds are going to raise it another 4% on basis points. We've already anticipated some of that pricing to come in. So you're not going to see a significant change in mortgage rates, historically speaking. It's kind of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say like that's what just I think people tend to misunderstand that a lot because they think, oh gosh, rates, the Fed said rates are going up a quarter point. That means the mortgage rate's going to go up a quarter point tomorrow. I better lock my rate or I better do this or that. And that's not true. You see movements in mortgage rates when something unexpected happened. So if the expectation is, that a quarter point is that the Fed's going to raise the rate by a quarter point, that's what everybody's expected. And like you just said, that's what, most people have priced in, most lenders. If it turned out that the Fed said, hey, we're going up by half a point, that would be a surprise and rates would probably make a big move up, right? Or if they cut the rate, like mortgage rates would probably come down as a result of that. Something that's totally unexpected, which has happened in the past. But at this point, with the current data, like that's been coming out recently, it doesn't seem like there's really any big surprise coming up. It seems like it's pretty well known what's supposed to happen today.
Yeah, I mean, and to give like a metaphor to it, it'd be like if you went to the gas station and you own, let's say the owner of the gas station was buying a gallon of gas. He was expecting to buy it at $3.50. And then when his supplier showed up, it only ended up being $3.30. And so there's 20% there, or 20 cents that are being left there for profit. And the gas station owner doesn't want to pass that on to you as the client, because you're going to want to go somewhere else and get your gas from somewhere else. And so then all of a sudden you come in thinking your gas is going to be 350 and it's only 335 or something like that, right? So it's important for people to understand that when they hear the feds are raising the rates, I've seen a Fed meeting happen and then our rates actually lower because, like you said, the expectation was met.
Yeah. So with all these movements and rates, like we talked about, like they went from 18 months ago they were 3.25 for a mortgage on a conventional loan, like right in that range, and today they're over 7, right? And so I think if you could just give us kind of a example of like what kind of an impact does that have on affordability, or on a payment for a buyer. Can you give us an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, so doing some just rough numbers, I mean, if you were trying to purchase a house that was at, 350 with all the same parameters, but the difference was interest rate. I mean, a difference in interest rate from 3 1/8 to 7 1/8 is hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And so that's going to directly affect any borrower and anybody wanting to potentially buy something, because if you look at a house that's again at 350, and the payment that you could have gotten, when it was 3 years ago would have been something that's $700 less than it is now. And so there's that feeling of FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. And it creates that panic sometimes. And so, when I look at where we are now, yeah, I would love to give anybody, if we could, a 2.5 or 3% rate. But where we are in the new norm is that we're not there. And so we talk about how we can be competitive and how we can get people to a place where we're minimizing that impact on affordability. And I know that, a lot of ways that we're doing that are through negotiations and actually having an established relationship with your buying agent and your lender. Because now more than ever, I've noticed that's super, super important, because deals are getting made or lost due to that communication and that ability to negotiate.
No, 100%. No, I totally agree with that. Like that's critical. What's interesting is just the conversations that I know that I have, and I'm sure that you've probably had a lot of the same, where people, they get those numbers, they plug it into a mortgage calculator or something, and they kind of figure out like, oh gosh, a $350,000 house or $400,000 house now costs me hundreds of dollars more per month. It's like adding a car payment on top of your mortgage, in some cases for the same price, right? And so I think that's caused a lot of people to feel like you said they feel like they missed out, and they're deciding not to buy as a result of that, because they're either waiting for one of two things, right? They're waiting for those rates to come back down into the threes, which you can speak to whether how likely that is, or they're waiting till home values come down, and I can speak to how unlikely that is. And so it's like people are waiting for these two things to happen, and it's like, gosh, does that make sense to do? You know?
Yeah, I mean, and it feels like something's got to give. It feels like the average buyer right now that doesn't own a house feels like they're in a rock and a hard place. And then you have people like in your other video, you were talking about the golden handcuff, the homeowner. They're tied to a rate that they don't want to give up, but they do need to make that move because they're having another baby, or they're needing to do some sort of change. And so the reality of what I see in this situation is, we got to get them, we have to find something that fits the buyer's needs. And we don't necessarily see home prices declining, especially on a local, Southern Oregon is kind of a microcosm of the nation. And we have a different metric to what, our activity is because we're so close to California, right? So when people are looking at the news and they see these national reports come in where they talk about, home prices being on a decline in some way, there are so many things that are factoring into that don't necessarily apply here. So like you can understand and attest to, we have a very strong market in Southern Oregon. Um, I mean, I don't really remember the last time I saw an appraisal that didn't come in at value, if not slightly over. You know what I mean?
I've seen a few lately, and which has kind of been interesting. And I don't know what the cause of that was, is because homes are holding their values right now. Like that's why like, we're talking about people waiting for values to come down. Like you're gonna be waiting a long time, in my opinion, because there's not that's you. I say it's on like almost every video. It always comes back to supply and demand. And we just talked about inventories going down, so we're at I think 10% of inventory went pending last week or 11%. That's 10 weeks worth of inventory. That's just over 2 months. In a balanced market, they say it's supposed to be six. So it's still on paper very, very strong in favor of a seller. In reality, like it's probably more closer to feels closer to balanced in most cases, depending on your price point. But under 400, under 500, I'd say even is pretty much still favoring the seller, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Um, but it is interesting. I mean, I have conversations with people like this all the time about should I wait, should I not, and I've said very clearly I don't think it makes sense to wait. I think the window that I would, based on what my perspective is, the window I would say to buy in is between now and the end of the year. Like that's if you are thinking about buying sometime in the near future, like try to get it done in this window between now and the end of the year. And I think that that's going to give you as a buyer the best, opportunity to get a good deal and all that kind of stuff. So that's from my perspective. I'm curious what from your perspective, what your suggestion would be there.
So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, I think that being a professional in this industry is a lot of times is telling somebody the right thing and not necessarily the thing that they want to hear, right? And looking at the data and what we're looking at here, I would assume that again, most people are trying to figure out is if I wait, what's the cost of me waiting? Does that mean that my down payment's going to go up if I wait? They look at these, I don't want to call them short-term goals, but they're not necessarily thinking about what they're missing out on by owning the house now as opposed to waiting. And so actually I have a presentation for that I had sent over with one of your listings, actually.
I was just going to ask you if you want me to pull that up.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think it's good to just have a practical example of what I'm talking about in terms of cost of waiting. And again, we're looking at a house that is listed at 450 and it's a 2-1, 1,400 square feet. So that gives you a pretty good indication of where our home prices are and how they've been just maintaining. There's my mug, that young ugly guy.
And all the contact information there. So that's your email and phone number, so that people can call you there. Can they text you there too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You can give me a call, text, email, send a courier pigeon, whatever's easiest for you.
Perfect. Okay. Good. Well, then let's go through. I'll let you talk through the scenario, and you just let me know when you want me to go through the next slide.
So yeah, you want to give them just a little insight on your listing here?
Sure. Yeah. So this is 480 Leavitt. I'm still unsure on the pronunciation there, but we'll go with Leavitt because that's what I've been saying. Lane in Grants Pass, and it's a pretty cool little place. Listed at 450,000, 5 acres. Super unique setup in that it's a 1 bedroom, but it actually has this giant bonus room that is Um, uh, Very flexible, could be utilized as, a guest bedroom, whatever, office, those sorts of things. So, yeah, so nice place, well priced at 450.
Yeah. So the next slide we show, I have provided two different graphs, and one of them is the historical forecast appreciation at the top. And then the bottom is kind of a blended average. And like I said, and what Brian said at the beginning, when we get into this is all speculation, but we're going off of historical data. And then I'm doing an average between what's the projected and the historical and averaging that out to 8.53%, which I feel like is a pretty conservative growth pattern considering everything that we've had year over year here. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. We saw, so just so people know that we've saw, when things were crazy, crazy, and I think it was 2021, it was well over 10%.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so much equity appreciation. And the if you look at these graphs, I thought it was important that we just look at the first 7 years. These are all based on, most of these programs or most of these scenarios are based on a 30-year conventional. Um, but most people will refi or sell their property within the first 7 years of getting that mortgage. And so, you either find a better rate, you need to move, whatever the situation is. So that's where I've put 7 years worth of data here in terms of appreciation gain. So if we were to purchase, and this specifically on the
Let me just explain real quick, just so people are paying attention here. What you're seeing on this chart, this top chart, is year zero is the purchase price of 450, and then it's going up by the 4.7% every year, and showing you after 7 years you're at 623,000 in value. Okay, and then what Ryan was saying, that forecasted appreciation of 8.5%. That's what's shown on the bottom chart here. So starting again at 450, going up by 8.5% a year, you end up after year seven at 798,000. So just want to clarify that a little bit so people are following.
and I appreciate that. And the breakdown next to each one of those graphs, because again, this is purchasing at 450 and putting 20% down, which is a $90,000 down payment. So the realized gains, where it shows it's inclusive of the $90,000 or 90,000 down, you're appreciating on a historical, so not even just on projection, just on where we are at, you're realizing a net gain of $208,000 just for owning the house. And that's not doing anything. So you talk about the cost of waiting, and there's a couple other ways that I break it down later on. But just in terms of not paying rent and paying yourself in the equity appreciation that you're gaining, these are massive numbers for people. I mean, a lot of things can happen with $200,000.
Yeah, that's like $30,000 a year, right? That's like if you walked into your boss's office, and they're like, "Hey, here's another 30 grand a year." Like, that's what you're getting here.
Exactly. And the next slide is just that same information, but it's put into one graph so you can kind of just see what that looks like compared on the same graph. And so for me, I'm an analytical person. I love, my dad always said there's two types of people out there, the people that want to know how the clock works and the people that just want to know the time. And I think that it's important to see what these metrics are in the projections that we're looking at, because your balance on your loan is going to be going down every month that you make your payment, obviously, as opposed to if you're paying rent, you're just paying a landlord who's then paying that towards their mortgage. So every month that your principal is going down and your value is going up, you're creating that wealth. You're creating that wealth for yourself, for your family, whatever the situation is that you're trying to build your house. I mean, most people's primary goals when they're buying their house is to have pride in home ownership and be able to leverage that equity if and when they ever need to. And so looking at just this data based on where we are, regardless of where rates are, if you can afford the payment and you feel comfortable enough to be in that position, you are only saving money and building your wealth for you and your family. So then the next slide, again, that's just kind of an informational graph. That's the same information. So you can see the forecasted value at the top at year seven and the historical and what the difference is between the two of those. Because again, we are just speculating to an extent.
In 7 years, did you already say you use 7 years because that's like the average length of time that somebody owns their home? That's right. Okay.
That's the average time that either somebody refinances or sells, because life, happens to be in a cycle, and it seems like the 7-year cycle is really where people find themselves making that change. Yeah. So the next slide, this is giving you some more data, right? And so this is looking at whether or not renting or owning makes sense in the cash flow analysis just at year 3, because I could have done a slide for each one of these years to break it down for you. But I wanted you to see what it would look like if you had bought a house, if you bought Levitt Lane today, and where you would be at 3 years from now. So this data, if you look in the bottom right where it says estimated cash flow, if you own the house, buying it in year 1, you have monthly expenses. Obviously, we're just using these numbers as just kind of hypotheticals. If you were to rent the property, you're going to have, renter's insurance. If you chose to, let's say it's $37 a month, and then you have your rent that you're paying at $24.42. Okay. Historically speaking, rent increases on an average of 6% each year. So there's a 6% increase in rent year over year. If you are paying rent to a landlord for 3 years and you start out at paying $24.42, by rent year 3, you're paying $27.44 in rent, right? You add all those payments up in the bottom left there, you would have spent almost close to $100,000 in rent. I mean, and that's just coming out of your pocket, going into the landlord's pocket. If you were to buy the house 3 years from now, you have an appreciation gain on your equity, but the difference of what you're putting into your own value versus somebody else is $108,000. So I think it's really important that people get those metrics when it comes to understanding that, again, and if you look at the value, estimated after 3 years, the value of your house is $558,000. So to your point, when somebody says, should I stay or should I go? Should I wait? Should I buy? What are you waiting for? What is your primary goal in buying this house? Is it affordability? Because if it's affordability, that's where we as professionals get in and start negotiating with the seller and the listing agent to understand what their motivation is to move. Because again, everybody's got their own, there's no one transaction that's the same. Everybody's got their own motives. It can be very different. And that's the other thing too, when you have people, especially buying the first house, because when you do something and you don't want to do it the wrong way, you rely and you lean on people that have done it before. And everybody has their own credit score. Everybody has their own experience with lending, with working with an agent. And your perception is reality. And so if you're not talking to somebody that's a professional, or the wrong one, you could be going off of information that could be misinformed. So again,
Sorry, I was just gonna say as you're saying that, there's a statistic that I had heard a long time ago, and I wish I remember exactly what the numbers were, but the comparison of the average homeowner and their net worth versus the average renter, and it's like 8 times or something more. It's something crazy. It's like substantially more. And so I was just trying to look on my phone to see if I could find that again. Um, but it was impressive, and this is why, right? Like when you're looking at these numbers and you can see you're going to be $100,000 in this scenario, right? $100,000, or sorry, the net gain $73,000 in 3 years.
right. And the thing for me with this is that, like I said, we're trying to figure out what somebody's primary goal is.
40 times more wealthy. Homeowners have a median net worth 40 times that of renters.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense because, again, you think about it, like right now, I mean, a lot of people, when they get into real estate, they buy their first house and that's their primary residence. They live in that house. Let's say in this situation, you live in this house for 3 years and you've paid your mortgage down. You're in a position where your value, according to this situation, would be at almost 560,000, right? And so let's say that you have a situation where you have to move, and you don't want to sell this house and you want to start building more wealth, because I'm sure that's what's factoring into that 40 times more wealthy number. You're going to be sitting there doing it. You could, if you wanted to, you could pull cash out from the house that you own, that house that you've owned for 3 years, take that money, put it on a down payment for your next house, and now you're renting that property out that you've lived in for at least 12 months, but in this case, 3 years. You're renting that property out, and how strong the rent schedules are around here right now, you're going to be making passive monthly income on top of the equity appreciation that you're going to be getting. Your renter now is paying your mortgage, and you didn't have to necessarily borrow from the bank to get to that point. You are borrowing for another loan potentially, but all of the money that you're borrowing against for your down is something that you can afford because somebody else is paying that for you. And I think that when people get, and I think it's important to focus on how you're going to get to that, owning that first house, but also how is that going to build you wealth? You know, um,
It's the best. I mean, real estate, in my opinion, is the best wealth generator because it's like you think about the stock market, and that's the analogy I like to use. In any 10-year period in history, if you look at, from day one to 10 years later, the stock market has never gone down in any 10-year period, and the housing market hasn't either. It's always been, if you could find like a 3-year period or 4-year period where it's gone down, right? But if you look at it over time, it's always going up. Yeah, it's good. There's dips and stuff, but it's always trending up, and that's the thing is like you can have a tangible asset, and as long as you buy right, you buy something that people want, that's going to be desirable. You take care of it. It's hard to lose, even if you pay 7%. And because you will hopefully have an opportunity to refinance that at some point down the road into a lower rate. So
that's a good segue, because I do want, I mean, as much as it is speculation, there are some hard truths that we do know and what we do anticipate to happen into this quarter, the fourth quarter of this year, and then coming into the next year. So I wanted to go over that a little bit with you right now. Summarizing it, basically, again, we're all of the people that I talk to in the industry feel like we are at the inflation numbers that we want to meet for the Fed. The Fed meets and their data is a little lagged. And so historically, like I said, this year rates have been pretty high. They've been as high as 7.5 in some instances, but in the last couple of weeks, the rates have been kind of fluctuating and a little bit under that. The speculation is that rates are going to continue to come down as we get closer and closer to that target inflation rate that the Fed set at 2%. What that means for us right now is it's going to help you in the long run in terms of a total monthly payment, but the rate that you could potentially be getting in January, you could get today with the right seller concession and doing a buy down on your interest rate. Where are we going to be and how hot will the market be in January? It's probably going to be a little hotter, because if rates start to come down, then there's going to be more people trying to enter because they don't know that they can potentially qualify. Right now is the time that I would say to at least start exploring your options and talking to one of us and just really kind of getting an idea of what you want and how we can get you there.
and that's I think such a great point, because there are so many other options available out there for people who are like, if you're stuck on the idea that like, I do not want to pay 7%, but I would pay 5.5, I'd pay 6, or I pay 5. Okay, cool. Like you said, there's these buy down programs, like a 2-1 buy down, where if instead of 7, you can make your rate 5 for the first year, and then 6 for the next year. So like those exist, and just people don't really know about them. And so that's where I'm saying, like, if you are thinking at all about buying in the next year or so, like, we should be talking now about what we can do to help get you to take advantage of what's going to happen between now and the end of the year, which is typically the best time to buy, because there's less competition in the fall. So you can really like have your cake and eat it too if you take advantage of the seasonality that we always experience. And then, if like what you said, if that speculation holds true and rates do come down, maybe it's 6 months from now or somewhere in there, they start coming down, home values have to go up. I mean, what else could they do, right? If more buyers are coming into the market because rates have come down, we have supply and demand again. Like it all comes down to that. If you bring in more buyers into the market without increasing the supply, then prices go up. So I think that you could have somebody. The scenario that I really like is you buy in the fall, you get a 2-1 buy down program or something, get a good rate into the spring, or a year later, you're going to be sitting really, really good with all that appreciation of the asset you know, that you'll get, hopefully, right? Like I'd love to see it play out like that. And I think there's a good likelihood that it does. But of course, that's speculation.
Well, and to back up that, what the projections are is if rates are projected to be lower next year than they are right now. So you get in on that house that you want now. You are comfortable with the payment and the rate that you have. You want it to be better. You want it to be lower, but you're comfortable with it. 12 months from now, rates are lower, whatever the case is. At that point, you can say, okay, do I want to refinance now and take advantage of that lower rate? What you've done is you've gained all that equity because you've owned the house for as long as you had versus not, and then waiting until next year when that house goes up 4.4%, and now that house is listed at 468, the same house you could have gotten at 450. And the difference in interest rate that you're going to have is going to be nominal because you can potentially get a lower rate than what people are telling you right now. But it starts with asking the right questions and talking to the right people. And I was just going to say, to piggyback what you're saying about the fall, you look at it just from a common sense standpoint. Most people don't like to move in the middle of Thanksgiving and the holiday season. So if you see a house that is listed in something to that capacity, a lot of times there's a higher motivation there. It's something that needs to happen. And so you look at that cause and effect, you know what I mean? So that's where you're saying historically we've seen, deals to be a little more attractive or maybe not easier to come by, but easier to negotiate when we're in this right now into the end of the year.
No, I love it, and I think what you're saying there is talking to the right people and having those conversations. I think that's a good segue into just saying like that's the next step. For people, like if you're kicking this around, you're thinking about buying or selling or whatever the case is, like have the conversations. Reach out to Ryan. His information is right there on the screen for you. Reach out to me, whatever, my phone number is 541-954-7758. I'll put that up on the screen. And also in the description of this video, there'll be all my contact information, all Ryan's contact information as well. So I think that is, solid for today, man. I appreciate you coming in here and talking about all this stuff and sharing your knowledge, and love working with you as usual. So thank you for doing this, and appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me, Brian. And I really enjoy, just being in the trenches with you every day. And I think that, like I said, I know that you and I plan on doing this for a long time, and especially in this area. And we want to be a wealth of resource and knowledge for anybody that watches these videos or anybody we can help. So if you guys, like I said, if you have any questions, by all means, we're all open books. You can't make an informed decision if you're not informed. So that's, definitely where we come from.
Thank you all for watching. Again, I'm Brian Simmons with eXp Realty, and if there's anything in the world I could do for you to help you buy, sell, or invest in real estate here in Southern Oregon, please don't hesitate to reach out. 541-954-7758 is my direct number. You can call or text me, or use the link in the description of this video to set up a time for us to meet online and chat face-to-face just like that. If you want to stay informed on the local real estate market here in Southern Oregon, click the subscribe button to this YouTube channel and click on that little bell icon so that you're notified next time a new video comes out so that you can stay in the loop. So thank you again for watching. You have a good one.